to a wonderful, wonderful lady. And I've got a little bit of a sort of a history or bio of her in the bulletin this morning. She's a singer, she's an actress, she's a musician, she's a playwright, she's a social activist, she's something of a scientist. She's quite an amazing gal. And she and her equally amazing partner, who's an editor for various film productions around Canada and the world, they've been living out on the Eastern Shore for quite a number of years. And every now and again, they come into BUC as a community because it resonates with their heart and their soul. And over the course of getting to know Catherine and her partner, I became aware that she was also working on an amazing production. It's a production that I hope will get to Broadway someday. And I'm rooting for it, and I'm putting out that intention in my own heart and life, because it's a musical that combines so much of what we hold dear and close to our hearts at BUC, and that is our passion for both ecology and spirituality, and our recognition of how ecology and spirituality are connected. And Catherine, in putting together this production, we've had conversations over the years, and I've learned this whole other side to herself, which has been very, very involved in the ecological movement and in the preservation and the protection of whales and dolphins and marine mammals. And one day, as we were talking about spirituality, and we were talking about how the Spirit is alive and existing as everyone and everything in the world. And Catherine, it suddenly dawned on me in my conversation, what she was saying to me is that God is manifesting not just as people, but as dolphins and as whales and as all the creatures alive on this earth as well. And they all are a part of the beauty and the expression of God's life. And in our conversation, we started talking about interspecies communication. And I thought, well, that's a cool kind of subject. That's a cool topic. And I said, Catherine, you've got to talk about that to our congregation. And being the wonderful gift that she is, she so graciously agreed to do so. Catherine, welcome her with a big hand, because you've got a treat here in store for you this morning.
Thanks. Wow, thank you. David, thank you for that amazing, amazing introduction. Wow, very humbling. It's absolutely wonderful to be here, and I brought my trusty cue cards because, as David knows well, I could probably do an entire day on this subject, and so this is going to keep me on track so that you guys don't get too hungry. So, to begin with, before I start, I just want to say thank you to a couple of other folks as well. Terry and my also helper back there, wonderful Paul, for all your behind-the-scenes support in my doing this. And also to my awesome partner and husband, Ken Petersen, for everything. Thank you, honey. But particularly today, I just want to thank Ken for all his work and help in putting together a few of the video, or all of the video clips that I'm going to share with you. As David mentioned, I have been involved with researching whales and dolphins. Most particularly for the past 18 years as the co-founder and project director of the Whale Stewardship Project, where we do research and protection and public education initiatives for the benefit of lone beluga whales, most of whom are very young, and they're lost. They're wild, they're lost, and they are looking for connection. Our research on those animals, I could spend all kinds of time on, but today I'm not going to talk about data or behavioral research so much, and or statistics or biology. Today is really my joy to share with you a perspective that is of the heart and is very spiritual in nature. So, and this is really the first time I've ever given a talk just in this way. So thank you all for taking this journey with me this morning. If I might use this. One other caveat that I want to say is that you're going to hear me talk a lot about connection with animals. So in no way am I saying or advocating that we all go out and try to hug a bear or ride a moose or do anything of the sort. I'm really speaking of our shared awareness and a consciousness in which we are connecting with other animals. All my life, I have been very blessed to be in the presence of animals. My 5 sisters and I, thanks to my wonderful mom and dad, grew up with horses, and we always had dogs and cats. We had ducks at one time, and even pet rabbits. And where we grew up, lakes and forests, rivers and fields meant we were always surrounded by wildlife of all kinds. But it was in my 20s that one particular animal really spoke to my heart, and it was a very transformational time and connection with this one particular animal. His name was Bobby, and Bobby was a leopard. So clearly I'm expanding this beyond whales, but I'll get to them. Bobby was one of my greatest teachers. He was at something called the Endangered Animal Sanctuary in Toronto. And it really was no sanctuary at all. It was actually an old dry cleaning store in the street of Toronto. And with Bobby, packed into this first floor and basement, were lions, tigers, no bears, but there were also monkeys and exotic birds, all manner of exotic animals. And they were all in deplorable conditions. When Ken and I discovered the Endangered Animal Sanctuary, we were kind of overwhelmed and just really needed to commit to doing something to try and improve the lot of these animals, to improve their lives. And so we felt the best thing that we could do with what we knew at the time was to create a video that would both educate and raise funds so that the animals could be moved to better conditions. So to write the script of that documentary, I needed to spend many weeks at the sanctuary. And during that time, I got to know the stories of each of the animals. But it was Bobby's story that I think touched me so deeply. Bobby was a pet, a former pet. He had his claws pulled out. He had his fangs filed down, and even so, he bit the hip of his owner, and she decided it was time to give him up, and that's how he ended up at the Endangered Animal Sanctuary. Unfortunately, living in a cage that was only about 8 feet by 4 feet, possibly by 7 feet high, and that was his life. He had a little platform in there that put him about this high, where he could sit on. So it was really no wonder that Bobby kept very much to himself, inside himself, and he didn't easily give you his attention. You had to earn it. So I'd like to introduce Bobby to you with the first video so that you can connect a little with Bobby. I wrote that song for Bobby called If You Listen, because he taught me to find that very still, silent place where there was understanding and a shared awareness between us, a shared awareness that went beyond words. He taught me, in order to do that, he taught me, what it looks like is basically I had to leave my ego at the door. I had to have no thought for myself, not one thought of someone else may be there in the sanctuary noticing that I was there with him. I really had to get clear and present. When I did that correctly, Bobby rewarded me. He looked at me. And then he would put his head down and press it into the mesh of the cage, and that would be an invitation for me to touch his head. It was a real honor and privilege to be accepted by him. But I began to worry that the day, that inevitable day when I just wouldn't be able to come consistently to the sanctuary, that was just going to happen. And I worried about this kind of bond that was developing. And that day did come. I got called on a job for a couple of weeks out west. And when I returned, what I feared occurred. Bobby wouldn't look at me. He ignored me. And I tried to talk to him in words. I tried to sing to him. He wouldn't look at me. And I suspected that this wound of his heart had happened other times with other people. And I wanted to tell him how sorry I was. So I did as he taught me. Oblivious to everything around me, people cleaning cages, feeding other animals, walking by the window on the street, I found that silent, still place and cleared all thoughts and didn't want anything from him. And I told him I was sorry. I told him I hadn't forgotten him. I would never forget him. I love him, and would he please forgive me? It was in that moment when I asked him to forgive me. He looked at me, and his eyes were so soft, and then he put down his head. Bobby had forgiven me. So, how do we explain that? This kind of connection between species has always been natural and a spiritual aspect of life for indigenous cultures. But now we can also use the quantum language to understand this and practice it. So here's how I understand it. I'm going to have to read some of this too. But this is how I understand it at a cellular level, because I, like all of us, I am made up of cells, which is made up of molecules, which is made up of atoms, which is made up of subatomic particles, which is made up of energy. That energy and information is part of me, and is me, and I am arising out of that vast, infinite field of energy and information. Bobby, as a leopard, is also cells, molecules, atoms, subatomic particles, and energy. And he too is arising out of that same vast, infinite field of energy and information. So at our source, we share the same source. He and I and all of us, all beings, are bathed in and part of that same quantum field. We're connected and we're inseparable. So Bobby is energy vibrating at a certain frequency, and I'm energy vibrating at a certain frequency. And when I entered that stillness, it was possible to tune in to Bobby's frequency. So we were literally on the same wavelength. That's when both of us were transmitters and receivers of energy and information that can be understood. When love is the carrier wave, I believe this is a practice that can heal the world. And it's a practice that I invite everyone to embrace, and it's a practice that I continue. So 18 years ago, when I started the research and protection of wild orphan beluga whales, we knew that the best way to keep them safe was to create guidelines for viewing them and encourage the public to appreciate them from a distance. And that's hard for people. And go to the next video. I understand how hard that can be when these animals are incredibly inviting. I've seen thousands of times how people long for connection, and the whales certainly were looking for connection too. The trouble is, even with our best intentions, we can get it wrong. We haven't learned as a species to be still with animals and listen deeply to them and what their needs are. So we can often fail to create that reverent relationship. And then there are often severe consequences, as seen in this short video clip from a feature documentary film called The Whale that's narrated by Ryan Reynolds.
There's always risk of injury to the people. There is always risk of injury to the whale.
One of the whales Cathy Kinsman tried to protect was a little beluga named Echo. Echo played with people in Newfoundland. But one day, he came back to the dock with this.
Echo paid a price for interaction. And all over the world, other species are paying a price for our misunderstanding, for our even innocent mistakes and overt ones, and also for our resistance to evolving our consciousness to include them in our choices and decisions. So Echo's just one example. When he was injured, there wasn't any veterinarian that knew of new marine mammals that could get there for about 2 weeks. And so there wasn't a whole lot else that I could do, except I intuitively knew there was one thing, and that was supported by one of the experts that I consulted. And that was to do what Bobby taught me so many years ago. To do that, to be there for Echo, I had to actually ditch my own guidelines and ignore my own research protocols that require that I be an objective observer. As we know, in quantum world is not actually even possible. We have an effect just by being present. So essentially, none of the rules mattered anymore. I just needed to be able to convey to Echo a sense of safety, of comfort and love. And hopefully that would be a medicine in its own way.
Herself interacted with the whale. The veterinarian told her that attention might help support Echo's immune system. So Kathy spent all her daylight hours by Echo's side for 2 weeks as he tried to heal.
After that 2 weeks, Echo disappeared, just as the vet was arriving. Everyone thought he had died from his injuries, but I never did. When I listened in that deep, still silence, I never got the information that he had died. So I remained hopeful. 2 months later, I got a call from a fisheries officer in Newfoundland. And one of the miraculous things about this was that I wasn't home in my home in Musquodoboit Harbor. I was actually in Corner Brook, Newfoundland, 45 minutes away from where this little whale had shown up. So we'll go to the next video. Echo came to me, he came to my camera, and he showed me he still had his eye. I thought he'd lost it. I was so excited, I was literally jumping up and down and singing, and I didn't care what anybody thought. I was so happy to see him, and it was stunning and miraculous. And it was truly this whole treasure trove of gifts from the universe. The gift that Echo survived that terrible injury and that he was healing. The gift of all the synchronicities that had to happen for me to be able to even be there to once again connect with him and to document for both science and spirit. This amazing connection that we just have because we're just not separate. So what, next video please. So what is this interspecies communication, this connection that I experienced with Bobby and with Echo and so many other non-human beings? Why is it so important? Without that connection of deep reverence and respect, Jane Goodall and the chimpanzees of Tanzania would not have collaborated, and we would not understand that species like we do today. And Diane Fossey and the mountain gorillas, they astonished us with their courage and their sense of what is possible for harmony between species. Denise Hersing is currently in the Bahamas conducting interspecies communication research with her wild and willing partners, the Atlantic spotted dolphins. And it's because of the sacred and loving connection between these traumatized orphan baby elephants and these beautiful caretakers at the David Sheldrake Wildlife Trust that years later, after the release of Into the Wild, many of them have returned to show their own newborns to their human family. Meaningful connection is not just for wildlife researchers and workers. We can all care and connect at the level of consciousness and spirit. hope I've inspired a greater understanding and sense of connection with other beings with whom we share the planet. Because at our source, we are all one. We are all divine. Thank you. Thank you. Namaste. Thank you.
Namaste, Catherine. The spirit in us honors the spirit in you that demonstrates the spirit alive everywhere. So be it. Thank you for coming. Amen.